Joe Biden lost in the Supreme Court. They would not extend the moratorium on evictions. He then called on Congress, who also was unable to pass a bill extending the moratorium on evictions. So what does that mean? The moratorium has expired as of yesterday. And now, well, it's Monday, so I'm sure the paperwork has been a-churnin'. And we can expect to see millions of eviction notices and potentially foreclosures. Some estimates say there's a couple million homeowners underwater, and there's several million more who haven't paid their rent in quite some time. All of these people could be evicted. Now, the scariest part of it is probably homeownership, because what happens when we see mortgages go underwater and mass foreclosures? This will hit everything. Not to mention, we could potentially see tens of millions of people out in the streets, or I don't know what. Now, still, the Democrats are trying to make some moves very quickly, but there's a big and very important elephant in the room. Does the U.S. government have the right to mandate you cannot evict someone? I've seen a lot of arguments saying they can't do that. The moratorium on evictions was unconstitutional as it was. We are seeing a dramatic abuse of authority from the government. And the funniest thing about it is right now is they're saying we're going to bring back all these mask restrictions. The vaccines are working. It's the craziest thing to me. Check this out. Mark Levin, among 165 million Americans who have been vaccinated, 99.9% not testing positive, 0.004% have been hospitalized, 0.001 have died. You want these odds? Get the vax, he says. Great. So why do you still need a moratorium on evictions? Well, interestingly, even if the vaccine is working as they wanted it to, as it's been planned to do, and the rates are going down, right? I'm saying, Mark Levin, correct, right? It doesn't change the fact that people are still underwater. So even if the restrictions all ended today, let's say they said no masks, they said, no restrictions, go to your business, do whatever you want, no tests required. People are still behind in their rent. People are still facing evictions. You see, these things are tied together. When they bring back the mask mandates, when they bring back lockdowns, included in the lockdowns, in the restrictions, is the moratorium on evictions. But if they're saying now the pandemic is, we're being rescued effectively by the vaccine, well then, if we don't need the mask mandates, which they removed, a month ago, they're bringing them back in many places. But let's say when they came out and said they didn't need them, why did we still have an eviction moratorium? The restrictions had ended. You see, the moratorium on evictions is a COVID restriction. They want to extend it. That can't function. These people who own buildings, they're running businesses. They have employees. I love how the left says being a landlord isn't a job. You've got to maintain a property. You've got legal obligations to the tenant. Typically, you pay a portion of the utilities. No, I mean like water bills. That's usually not on the tenant. And some other bills too, depending. Sometimes the electrical can't be separated, so it's just included, or heat may be included for a variety of reasons. These are people who have to pay property taxes, mortgages, insurance. So they're running a business. You don't have those obligations as a tenant. Some people prefer that trade-off. I personally think it's not a good trade-off, but the people exist. So here's the latest. Now, on July 30th, we heard that evictions were looming and Biden has failed to get Congress to extend the ban. We now have House Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leaders calling on Biden to extend the eviction ban. He can't. He tried twice. He went to the Supreme Court. They said no. So what comes next? I don't know. Is it going to be like The Big Short? A massive economic recession or depression or whatever? I love how the media keeps pretending like everything's fine. Everything's okay. It's weird how they do that, right? With COVID, they're screaming the end is nigh. And then you look at the actual, like the New York Times was like, look at these infection rates. And even the White House came out like, stop, that's not true. So the New York Times came out and said that vaccinated people could spread COVID the same as unvaccinated people. And the New York Times came out, the White House comes out and says that's incorrect. Because the actual data is that if you are one of the rare breakthrough cases to get COVID, then you have potentially the same viral load as somebody who isn't vaccinated, but there's substantially less people vaccinated who have gotten COVID, as I just showed you with that tweet from Mark Levin. Whether you trust the guy or not, the point is The lockdowns make very, very little sense. And the media is screeching that the end is nigh. The point, when you look at the economic crisis, when you look at 2008, what did they say? Bye, bye, bye. Everything's good and you are happy. And then everything fell. Now, I can only speculate as to why that is. Perhaps it's because, as I've mentioned before, and you probably realize this, no one wants to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. They come out and scream the end is nigh, and then everyone starts running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And, that's not a good thing for anybody. Or you can get a little bit darker and say that the wealthy, powerful interests wanted to extract from the system as much as they could before it all collapsed. You see, you have to buy so that somebody can sell. And if somebody's rich and they're like, I don't want to be holding on to mortgages, I don't want to be holding on to properties, the property value is going to go down. They want to sell, baby. Give you the property. So when price tanks, you're the one left holding the bag. Then they buy it back up for pennies on the dollar. So right now, what do we see? I love this. We have these stories. Look at this one from the Wall Street Journal. World economy caps extraordinary return from COVID-19 collapse. Really? I thought there were like 9 million job openings and there was a labor shortage, an oil shortage, a chlorine shortage. We've got food shortages. Man. But sure, an extraordinary return. Okay, well, I'll be fair. We'll read this. But let's see what's going on right now with this evictions expected to spike as the moratorium ends. The Democrats, as I mentioned, are going to Biden saying, please, Biden, extend this. Dude already tried. It ain't going to happen. Unless there's like an executive order, which then he gets sued over. Yeah. The AP reports evictions, which have mostly been on pause during the pandemic, are expected to ramp up on Monday after the expiration of a federal moratorium as housing courts take up more cases and tenants are locked out of their homes. Housing advocates fear the end of the CDC moratorium could result in millions of people being evicted in the coming weeks. But most expect an uptick in filings in the coming days rather than a wave of evictions. The Biden admin announced Thursday it will allow a nationwide ban to expire. It argued that its hands are tied after the U.S. Supreme Court signaled the moratorium would only be extended until the end of the month. House lawmakers on Friday attempted, but ultimately failed, to pass a bill to extend the moratorium even for a few months. Some Democratic lawmakers had wanted it extended until the end of the year. Struggling renters are now facing a health crisis and an eviction crisis, said Alicia Mazzara, a senior research analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Without the CDC's moratorium, millions of people are at risk of being evicted or becoming homeless, increasing their exposure to COVID, just as cases are rising across the country. The effects will fall heavily on people of color, particularly Black and Latino communities, who face greater risk of eviction and more barriers to vaccination. More than 15 million people live in households that owe as much as $20 billion to their landlords. Wow! According to the Aspen Institute. 15 million people. What happens if they are on the streets? Boy, you do not want to find out. That's crazy. $20 billion. As of July 5th, roughly 3.6 million people in the U.S. said they faced eviction in the next 2 months, according to the U.S. Census Bureau's household pulse survey. Okay, so 3.6, a lot less than 15 million. We'll see how that plays out. Parts of the South and other regions with weaker tenant protections will likely see the largest spikes in and communities of color where vaccination rates are sometimes lower will be hit the hardest. But advocates say this crisis is likely to have a wider impact than pre-pandemic evictions. The Biden administration had hoped that historic amounts of rental assistance allocated by Congress in December and March would help avert an eviction crisis, but the distribution has been painfully slow. So far, only about $3 billion of the first tranche of the $25 billion has been distributed through June by states and localities. Another $21.5 billion will go to the states. Ashley Fonseri, 22, who will be in court Thursday for an eviction hearing after falling several $1,000s behind on her Fayetteville, Arkansas 2-bedroom, said her landlord has refused to take rental assistance. She left her job after being hurt in a domestic violence incident and suffering from depression and anxiety. The eviction hearing is a day after her domestic violence case goes to court. Full stop. What does that person have to do with COVID? People get evicted all the time. People choose to leave work all the time. That is not the fault of the landlord. I'm not a big fan of landlords in many respects. I don't like the idea of... I'm not a big fan of... What's the right word for it? Extracting from a system and providing nothing to it. Now, I'm not saying all landlords do that. I'm saying there are some people in every industry who don't work and get free stuff. I'm not a fan. I have no problem with investing in capital gains. I'm just saying that there are a lot of moochers in this country. You know what I'm talking about? And they tend to live pretty well. Some of these people have properties and their landlords. Some of these people might be, day traders. They're just people that I feel extract from the system and don't provide to it. But anyway, I digress. That being said, this individual chose to leave her job, and now she's saying she doesn't want to pay. I don't see it. You want to talk about COVID? That I understand. Through no fault of your own, you're unable to pay. Not in this regard. It's something else. It frustrates me and scares me, she said, of being evicted. I'm trying so hard to make it right, and it doesn't seem like it's enough. But you left your job. Now, to be fair, she was suffering from depression and anxiety. She was attacked. She was in a violent domestic incident. But what do we do here? Right? No, I mean, it's like a serious question. I'm not happy that happened to her. But we can't. It's communism just isn't possible. And the reason I'm just injecting communism here, what I mean is we can't just take everybody and guarantee everything to them because somebody has to make something. So if you have somebody who needs a home, somebody's got to maintain and make that home. The landlord needs money to pay for a maintenance crew and to pay for utilities and taxes and the mortgage to support the system because people need access to resources. If you stop working for some reason, you get evicted. I don't know what to tell you. Could there be a better system? I believe so. Absolutely. 100%. I believe that we can do a lot better. But one of the problems is, and this is coming from somebody who worked at a homeless shelter to deal with this crisis like these. For one, it's a lot of choice for a lot of individuals. Some people don't want to be homeless and would get out of homelessness when given the opportunity, but that's a small minority. More importantly, you can't just take empty homes and put people in it. Money has to go towards paying other people to do work. If you want the building to be maintained and safe, then you need to have someone maintaining it and keeping it safe. The people who live there typically don't know everything. I got to call the AC guy when the AC goes out. I got to call the fire department when there's an issue with wiring or something. We think there's a fire or smoke alarm goes off. Not something an individual can just do. You may be saying, well, at the very least, let them live in the crumbling, dilapidated homes. And then what? When the building starts fire and then the other buildings around it catch fire, yeah, it doesn't work. The system needs to be maintained by labor and you can't force people to do it. So I don't know what your answer is. I really don't. And now we're facing the crisis, the rental evictions fiasco. Democrats want an emergency measure to last forever. The Wall Street Journal with their interesting take. They said, perhaps you've read that the pandemic recession officially ended in April 2020. That the economy grew 6.5% in the second quarter. That employers are desperate to find workers and the housing market is booming. Never mind. Democrats are in a panic because the federal ban on landlords evicting tenants who haven't paid rent in 16 months expired on Saturday. The eviction moratorium was perhaps justifiable amid the early lockdowns that threw millions out of work. But it's now a cautionary tale of how bad policies distort behavior and are difficult to end. Yes. The original CARES Act moratorium that only applied to federally subsidized housing expired last July. But the Trump CDC imposed its version in September. The moratorium applied to all rental housing and tenants who earned less than $99,000 or $198 for couples who claimed they lost income because of the pandemic. Landlords who evicted non-paying tenants could go to jail. Congress extended the ban in December for a month. But then the Biden admin extended 3 times through Saturday. Despite rulings from several judges, the CDC had exceeded its authority. Last month, Chief Justice John Roberts and Kavanaugh joined the liberals in maintaining a stay on a lower court injunction reversing the ban. Kavanaugh wrote that he had agreed the CDC acted unlawfully, but allowed the moratorium to continue so rental assistance appropriated by Congress could have more time to be distributed. But he said a clear and specific congressional authorization would be necessary for the CDC to extend the moratorium past July 31st. I do not see how this is constitutional. Cue the political panic. On Thursday, 2 days before July 31st, the White House issued a statement essentially blaming the Supreme Court. Nancy Pelosi declared a 5-alarm fire, attempted to rush an extension through, and failed. Too many Democrats balked. Biden implored Congress to extend the ban, only because $3 billion or so of the $46 billion in rental relief that Congress appropriated has been distributed. But whose fault is that? Not the landlords. What's going to happen then? You know, I understand. This is a very, very interesting conundrum. This is exactly what I talk about when I say government social programs do not work. Now, hold on. I like the idea of government social programs. When I say they don't work, what I mean is in the way we do things. They need to expire, hard stop, period. We probably need a chilling out, mellowing period. So here's the way I'd envision it right now, off the top of my head. We impose an eviction moratorium because of the businesses being shut down and because of the pandemic. All right, we all agreed 15 days to slow the spread, but things kind of got out of hand. And then we had a problem of moral clarity when rioters were going around smashing things and they were protesting the thousands, and they claimed that wasn't affecting the pandemic, making many people say, what? But anyway, I digress. As the moratorium starts coming to an end and you may be evicted, what should happen, in my opinion, is that we should taper things off. There should be a slow... It should be like, for the next month, you have to pay 80%. For the next month after that, or I'm sorry. The moratorium doesn't just end. It says, this next month before we expire, 20% must be paid, then 40%, then 60, then 80, and then you're back to normal. And then you should have, it should probably go up to 110, actually. Your rent should increase to pay back the lost revenues and to compensate. So your rent should start climbing back up just a little bit to some degree. Maybe not 100%, but the point is you get several months to slowly get the machine back churning again. An abrupt stop makes no sense. However, the problem I have with these programs is that they become bloated. We created this moratorium, and now we can't just turn it off. You've created people who are addicted to the system. The story from the AP of a woman who chose to leave her job. Yeah, I mean, how is that the responsibility of people fighting, the pandemic? How is that the responsibility of us that you chose to leave your job at a time when there's massive job openings? I'm supposed to empathize with someone who's like, I have anxiety and depression. I can't work. I'm like, okay, I do, sympathize. But life's not easy. What is this idea among people that we should be able to just lay in the grass all day and eat the free fruits on the trees and have houses just existing for us? You have to make stuff for there to be stuff. Well, whatever, man. Great reset, I guess. CNBC reports 32% of U.S. households missed their July housing payment. That was July 8th. Moratorium on evictions? What about homeowners? We can talk about people losing their apartments all day and night. But what happens when mortgages start going belly up? CNBC says, as the economic fallout from COVID continues, almost 1/3 of U.S. households have not made their full housing payments for July, according to Apartment List. About 19% made no payments and 13% only paid a portion. That's the fourth month in a row. A historically high number of households were unable to pay their housing bill on time and in full, up from 30% in June and 31% in May. Renters, low income and younger households were most likely to miss their payments. Well, what happens when all these young people are left out on the streets? When they lose their houses? You're going to get a lot of communists. You're going to get a lot of communists, okay? What I mean is these are kids with massive student debt, struggling to earn and own property, and I need you to think about things 10 years from now, not things today. Millennials, 30, 40. I'm 35. I'm a millennial. We are struggling as millennials to own property. The boomers hold a disproportionate amount of property and wealth relative to the previous generations and those coming, moving forward. So Gen Xers have less wealth. Millennials have even less wealth. Now, the millennials who did manage to get houses, they can't afford to pay their mortgages and they're going to get foreclosed on. And the people who get evicted, well, the millennials who get evicted will get an eviction on their record. Sucks. Well, the people who bought homes and couldn't pay will get foreclosures on their credit reports. That's a whole lot worse. Punishing those who are actually climbing out of that bucket. Crabs in a barrel, as it were, right? Crabs in a bucket. You know the saying? Once the crab starts climbing out, the other one pulls him back in. Well, some of these crabs made it to the top, man. Some of these millennials were like, we got houses. And COVID happened. Okay. 10 years from now, these millennials will be in massive debt, student loans, potentially even foreclosure debt, depending on what happens. Let's say the housing market collapses. Someone's, $100,000 underwater. The bank sells the house for $70,000 to recuperate its losses and then tax that $30,000 debt onto the individual. Now they got an additional $30,000. They don't live anywhere. Oh, you are going to see a revolt. Now, when the boomers start passing on that wealth will be transferred. The wealth doesn't leave the planet, but who gets it? A lot of their kids, I suppose, but too many millennials are going to be without property. Perhaps that's the Great Reset. It's not an abrupt thing that happens instantly. It's something that happens generationally. Millennials will have very little wealth. There will be massive oligarchy. The ultra rich will become ultra rich. The houses that we're seeing from old people, they'll get reverse mortgaged or sold to BlackRock. The elderly people will take the money. Half of it will go in death taxes or whatever it's called, inheritance tax and stuff like that. And then you'll end up with a bunch of really poor, homeless, indebted millennials, and they will go to the government and say, save us. And the government will say, sure. And there you go. Hey, authoritarianism and communism, all that stuff, right? That sounds pretty good for everybody. Is that what you're looking forward to? I'm not. But it's going to be gradual. Not to mention that you've got 15-year-olds today who are ultra woke, and in 3 years, they'll be voting. You've got 10-year-olds who are being indoctrinated in these schools. In 10 years, they'll be voting. So this is the funny thing about conservatism, how it changes and drifts leftward, because they got the kids, you know. They are the ones propagandizing the children. The conservatives, you know, I'll tell you one thing. I'll end with one final thought on all this stuff. I hear a lot from prominent people about the problems of critical race theory and critical race applied principles, and they say that they're protesting to get it removed. And there's a lot of very prominent people, or, you know, people are like, thank you so much for calling out these problems. And I'm like, that's a good thing. But it's like a half measure. What's the alternative? What are you offering people? You have to create something. You know, I realized this a while ago. We're sitting back watching young people be stripped of their wealth by massive, powerful oligarchs. It's no wonder they're becoming leftists. So we got to offer something. We've got to do something. So I'm going to do something. You know, we're building culture. We've got 2 new shows on the horizon, which are cultural and not political. One's partly political. It's the Mysteries Show. We're bringing on more people to produce more content to build culture. We're going to do news and culture and politics. And I'm also going to be setting up our investigatory wing, in a sense. It's going to be a separate entity, a nonprofit that will just do non-political investigatory journalism. So it will have nothing to do with politicians or anything like that. And then we're looking at doing an educational nonprofit. I thought about this, you know, with respect to James Lindsay and Christopher Rufo, to change the future, to inspire young people, to help them believe in themselves and believe in merit. We have to present these schools an alternative. So instead of just saying critical race applied principles are bad, we need to say, here's, you know, liberal race theory or whatever, where we're like, treat people like equals and you know, help people succeed and give them the opportunity. I think that'd be fantastic. We got to do more. I think something big is coming this month. Something big is coming with these evictions. There's a lot happening this month. I don't know. I hope you're ready. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.